Hi everybody, this is Jonathan Scott of the Big Cat People talking to you from our home here in Nairobi, Kenya. And we in 2021 created something which we called the Sacred Nature Initiative. And it was built on three pillars: to inspire through our work, our photography, television programs, podcasts; to educate, to try and get the message across to as broad an audience as possible; and then ultimately, through doing that, to have some chance of conserving this wonderful natural world of ours, which I think everybody would agree is under such great threat. In 1977, I went to live in the Masai Mara, this extraordinary piece of wild real estate in southwest Kenya. It's the little brother of the Serengeti to its south in Tanzania, and if ever you wanted a photographer's paradise, it has to be it, the easiest place in the world to take pictures. Now, 50 years later, we were horrified when we heard and then read an article in the New York Times, I think it was the 3rd of January 2023, and it was basically the cheetahs made a kill and then the vehicles moved in. And of course, straight away, we knew what this was going to be about. And it had picked up on the fact that there was a video which went viral in October the previous year, which showed two of a very famous coalition of cheetahs, Tano Bora, 5 cheetahs. We actually filmed them for Big Cat Tales in 2017-18. And this video showed the 2 cheetahs chasing down a wildebeest calf. It was that time of the year, grabbing it and then instantly being mobbed. You couldn't describe it as anything else, by hordes of vehicles. The noise, the shouting, the jostling for position, the furor amongst the guests and the drivers as to who was getting in their shot or in front of them or what they were doing, and little thought for these 2 cats who were just simply trying to get a meal. And as habituated as they might be to vehicles, this was over the top. And the New York Times picked up on what they described as an aggressive form of tourism. And of course, we now have the selfie epidemic, which means you don't want to just get close for a better look. You want to get close, turn your back on the very thing that you're actually watching and say, "Hey, Mum, look at me, I'm here." As if they didn't do that, it would mean they'd never been there. Well, of course, a disaster. But what this prompted Angie and myself to do was to sit down and instead of saying, well, let's wait for government or the administration or somebody to do something about that, because you could be waiting your whole life, was what can we do to help? And so we created, through the Sacred Nature Initiative, something we called Safari Etiquette. In a nutshell, it's simply to try and promote a more mindful, a more considerate, a nicer way of being amongst wild animals. And then we realized that actually photography was part of the problem, because today everybody's a photographer, whether with a big lens or with a phone, with a smartphone. And so we decided to do an ebook, Safari Etiquette, and lay out the golden principles as to how you should really conduct yourself on safari at the best interests of the natural environment and the wildlife. It's a very tricky process to bring information to people and to say to people what they can't do, but we felt if we say why you shouldn't and tell you before you even go on your game drive, that maybe it would be a softer experience. It would be something that people would appreciate in knowing about, and it would be something which would serve a purpose.
Would you like to say something about the Masai Mara as a tourist attraction versus the Masai Mara as a conservation entity?
Yeah.
And people probably think it's one or the other.
Of course.
What's your take on that?
We need to make a distinction here between 2 priorities, if you like. Basically, as David Attenborough always says, if the health of the natural environment isn't the most important issue facing mankind today, then what is? Now, the Mara was set aside initially for the wild animals. In fact, at some cost to the local people. So the Maasai, who didn't really have a sense of land ownership, with their herds, nomadic wandering, they just considered the Mara and the ecosystem as a whole, so the Serengeti to the south in Tanzania. It's an area as an ecosystem, so the park, the protected area and surrounding area, private land, it's about 25,000 square kilometers, which has got to be about 10,000 square miles, give or take. So it's a huge area. And the protection that it's being given, whether it's a national game reserve, which the Masai Mara is, administered on behalf of the local people by the local government, to the benefit of the people and to the landscape. To the south, a national park, Serengeti National Park, and then areas surrounding it, some of which in Tanzania are hunting, some of which are, mixed use areas. But the fact is, the whole concept of those protected areas, that's the key to it. They were protected because they were seen as being so crucial, so important, not least because they harbor one of the last great migrations on Earth. 1.5 thereabouts million wildebeest, 200,000 zebras, 500,000 gazelles. I mean, it's just staggering. There is nowhere else. We call it the last place on Earth. Not because it's necessarily about to disappear, but just because of its sacredness, its importance, simply as a piece of real estate, natural real estate for the whole world. To protect these areas, you need a budget. And it's going to be expensive. To set aside areas that you're going to say to people, which it has said, you can no longer live or move in here. This is just for the wild animals. It's a huge part of Kenya's economy. The hard currency that comes in from tourism is huge, and the Masai Mara is the jewel in the crown. And so it's hugely important both economically and as a natural resource.
And all over the world, loved tourist attractions are literally being loved to death.
Yes.
And we're praying that the Masai Mara will not be loved to death.
Exactly.
And tourists and visitors who are not just welcome but necessary are actively involving themselves in conservation.
Yeah.
How can we create that mindset that you're not just here to take your pictures and go home again, but you're actively aiding the conservation effort?
I do believe that there are more people today who, when they travel, want to know, particularly if they're going to something like to do a safari, for instance, which involves going to a natural environment, that they want to know more about where am I going to be staying, what's the impact going to be, what is the company, the tour operator, the camp or lodge that I'm going to be staying at, what are they giving back? Is it just about profit? Is it just a business? Or are they wedded to the fact that their business is based on utilizing a natural resource? And the beauty about somewhere like the Mara and wildlife is that it's self-sustaining. As long as it's got somewhere to live, wild creatures will procreate. Your elephants will breed, your lions will breed. They need a landscape, they need a home. If you can give them that, you've got this extraordinary resource, self-perpetuating. But the fact is that if you're going to do that, as we say, you have to nurture it and you have to manage it. And the challenge for the tourism industry is to balance, let's be frank about it, a tendency to be greedy with making a profit, but not actually trashing the environment on which it's based upon. That more and more people want to feel that they are actually contributing to the well-being of the natural environment and crucially to the well-being of the local community. So this is really the criteria that we're trying to fix on. And we're now looking to see, can we get the tourism industry to step up, in particular with Safari Etiquette. Every year during the high season around the world, whether it's Venice, whether it's people visiting Rome, whether it's people going to not just necessarily a natural wonder, but maybe a historical antiquities, going to museums, going to famous places, the Colosseum. The crowds, for the local population who lives there, it's a nightmare. So how do you manage all those people who want to come and visit so as you don't completely trash the environment? And this is the challenge. So with Safari Etiquette, we've got two challenges. We want to try and create the best protocols for the guides themselves. So in other words, they know exactly what should or shouldn't happen when they're taking you on safari. And then we want you, the visitors, to be better informed, so as when you come, you've already been prepared with the thought that this is something extraordinary. An African safari is a privilege. It's something that you should stand in awe of. And most people do, but they get so excited that the rules and regulations can go out of their minds. So that's where we're trying to position ourselves.
I think it would be reasonable to say that the Masai Mara Reserve and the conservancies around it have been and are an incredible success story in terms of conservation.
Yeah.
The sheer wealth of wildlife that people can see is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So give us some of the highlights from the Safari Etiquette. What is it that people should do to be part of that conservation story and not part of the unnecessary destruction?
You know, Safari Etiquette, as we say, takes you through a whole series of bullet points and then puts some flesh on the argument, if you like, as to why we would hope that you wouldn't get too close to a mother lion with tiny cubs. That if you are looking and you can feel an animal is stressed by your approach or you're too close, that you should move back. Now, there are one or two really critical elements of Safari Etiquette, which, as I say, the rules and regulations are there. Narok County Council, or county government, who administers the Masai Mara National Reserve, they have bylaws, rules and regulations, of which some are being upgraded to take into account some of the issues created by that article and by the fact that there are so many people wanting to visit the Mara. That's the trouble, there's too many people. How do you regulate them? How do you control them? How do you keep people from just turning a situation into a riot? And so some of the key things: listen to your safari guide, and particularly we would hope that your camp or lodge on arrival, before you go on your first game drive, will sort of give a little bit of gravitas to the fact of this is something special. You're going to be going out into one of the world's, if not the world's greatest wildlife areas. You're going to see all kinds of extraordinary things, and you need to be respectful. Listen to your guide. He's in charge. He is out every day of the week looking for these animals, looking at these animals. So listen to what he says and try to be a little bit quiet. Try to absorb some of the magic. We always say, if the guide briefs you and says, look, we might see a leopard or lions with cubs. If we do, first thing is, keep the noise down. The lions don't want to hear a load of chattering, however much they may seem, oblivious to it. Be respectful, be considerate, so keep the noise down. Secondly, don't sit up on the roof of the car. Don't get out of the car. Because one of the key reasons why these creatures seem magically as if they're your friends, and as if they know you, and as if they don't mind your being there at all, even when you've driven up towards 25 meters from them, and they seem totally unconcerned. Why? Because they've grown up with it. But they've grown up with you, your body outline being masked by the vehicle. When those same lions see a Maasai walking at 100 yards away or 200 yards away, they will flatten down and probably just disappear into the bushes. They're frightened of people, and with good reason. Our history with wildlife, dating back eons, is one of competition. So don't make it difficult for the animal to start confusing them by showing yourself visibly out of the car or on top of the car. If your guide says to you, look, I can tell the lioness is a little nervous, she's got small cubs, we've got a great view here, and as tempting as it is, you'd like to get a little bit closer, I'm going to say to you, we have to stay here. Now, if the lions walk towards the vehicle or past it, great, fantastic, it's your good luck. But let's not push the limits, not put them under pressure. So keep quiet, obviously don't throw litter out, don't get out of your car or sit up on the roof, And if you happen to be at a place where the wildebeest are crossing in the dry season, the wildebeest and zebra come and cross the Mara River at times, it's one of the world's great natural spectacles. Keep quiet, don't stand on the roof, don't get out of the car. Think of these things as life or death moments for the animals. This is real life for them. As I say, it's not entertainment. They're not putting on a show. If you get out and disturb them, they might run into lions, they might break a leg, fall over the edge of the bank of the river because they're frightened by your presence. So these are some of the key things about safari etiquette.
I was recently in the Masai Mara and was amazed, as ever, always, just how much there is to see and enjoy and be part of.
Yeah.
And I personally always like the idea of put the camera down for a few minutes, just be in that moment. Because it is a unique, life-changing experience for all of us every time we go. And you and I have been doing it for many, many years. You identify yourself as the big cat man. You know more about the big cats in the Masai Mara than anybody else on earth. But photographically, giraffes, elephant herds, elands, zebra migrations. I mean, these are some of the most iconic and photogenic creatures. What is it that captures people about the big cats?
You know, it shouldn't just be about the big cats, and that might seem pretty ironic from somebody, you know, with Angie who worked on Big Cat Diary all those years, Big Cat Tales, written all these books about the big cats. What is it about the big cats? Well, they're big, they're sexy, they're beautiful, and they're predators. There's a tension about them which they can just go from being all sweet and lovely with their cubs to suddenly getting up and seeing a buffalo or a wildebeest and setting off with the intent to make a kill. And that is definitely part of the allure of these great creatures. And of course, television programs have encouraged us to think that this is probably the most important. You know, am I going to see a kill? Will I see this? But I think there's more to it than that. A friend of ours, Professor Amy Dickman at Oxford University, looked at what is it about particularly, say, lions. Because if you look at the top 10 animals, people's most popular animals, lions will be right up there. Polar bears, tigers, elephants, yes, but lions in particular. And what they identified was that lions represent wildness. That, you know, so many of us, 60% of people now live in cities, in urban environments. We're isolated, we're shut off. We close the door behind nature and come inside. We get our food from the fridge, we get water from a bottle. Everything's, you know, there for us, and it's not still connecting us with where it comes from, which is the natural world. It's not a choice. Natural world is life itself. And what we have, in a sense, we miss, I think, this emotional angst is that sense of getting back out into the wilderness. The peace and quiet, going for a walk in the forest, and of course the tension that a big cat brings to the environment. Well, I can promise you, if you haven't seen your first big male lion yet, I can hear Angie laughing at me because it's always, oh my God, did you see the size of the tusks on that elephant? Or did you see the mane on that lion? Well, I can remember 50 years ago seeing my first 2 male lions at the edge of Musiara Marsh, where the Marsh Pride that we named and which featured in Big Cat Diary, where they lived, 2 male lions standing, manes just blowing in the wind. And I just looked at them and I was in heaven, because they represented for me something that I'd lost, a connection that I'd lost, a sense of being part of this extraordinary natural world. And so I think the lion is symbolic. I mean, let's face it, Trafalgar Square, wherever you go in the world, whether there were lions there or not, and at one point lions were the most widespread large mammal on Earth after humans. Not necessarily the most numerous, most widespread. And so in all of the history of people around the world, you will find symbols of lions, whether it's statues in Trafalgar Square, whether it's on the emblems of the Kenya national rugby team. The lion is it, the warrior spirit. And so that actually draws our attention. But let me tell you something. You come on safari, you can't see it all. But think about somewhere like the Mara, over 500, probably nearer 600 species of birds, all the antelope, the elephants, the buffalo, it's not just the big cats. Put the camera down and just absorb the wonder of what you're seeing. When we first came up with the idea of Safari Etiquette, we were very aware, Angie and myself, we're a couple of oldies now, we've been doing this for 50 years. Yes, we have the benefit of experience. We started one of the first driver training courses in the Mara, because having been a guide myself, I know the pressure that you're under. And you want to please the guests. You want them to have an amazing time. You want them to see everything. But the fact is, there's so much to see, so much pressure to see the big five, the lions, the elephants, the leopards, the buffalo, the rhino, and then all the other stuff as well. We tend to measure our experiences on, did you get the picture? Did you get the shot? And in photography, we know all about the decisive moment, which is when suddenly that's the shot. Unfortunately, photography is an extremely competitive profession. And with social media now driving the whole industry in terms of how many people are going to follow you, particularly if you're a photographer and you're leading photo workshops, many professional photographers come with groups to the Mara. But the problem is, and I put this at the feet of some of the top wildlife photographers, which is that in some ways they're breaking the conventions. They're out of their cars, they're lying on the ground in front of rhinos or elephants, and not only are they doing it, but they're showing it to everybody online. That's stupid. That's dangerous. It's not doing any help to anybody, and it's diminishing the very thing that you're trying to actually share with people. So we need to rein it in. Of course, now, with everybody being a photographer with their phone, the requirement to be closer to make it look good is even greater. You know, probably the best advice? If you can bear it, put the camera down, make it part of the safari that you are going to take time not to be glued behind the viewfinder of your camera, and you're going to truly absorb the wonder of being on safari through your own eyes. I love it when somebody, as they always do, what cameras do you use, what equipment, what gear do you use? And as one photographer said, my eyes.
And there is even a bigger picture, I think. The world is losing its wildlife and its great wide open spaces faster than ever.
Yeah.
And by participating and signing up and being part of the Safari Etiquette and taking responsibility for wildlife when you're on safari, you are helping to protect this planet of ours, which is so finite and so fragile.
Absolutely. There is a human tidal wave pushing the wilderness and the wildlife off the planet, and we all want to see it and experience it. Well, if we're going to do that, we have to reclaim the sacred in nature. We have to reclaim a sense of loving nature, not just using it, not just seeing it as a commodity, not just seeing it as being there for our entertainment. We have to treasure it, and that was the whole idea behind the Sacred Nature Initiative.
I know, Jonathan and Angela, you have a lifetime of investment in the Masai Mara and the big cats in particular. Award-winning photographers featured in so many wildlife films, I can't even begin to enumerate them all. Thank you for this. Let's all help you to create that legacy that preserves wildlife for eternity and not just treats it as a resource. Thanks, Jonathan.